All right. Well, welcome everybody to the traffic calming meeting for Mashburn Road. My name is David Greaves. I work with NDOT on the traffic calming program, and we're meeting here tonight on April 22nd, 2025 at 5:30 p.m. We are meeting virtually only, so this recording of the meeting will be posted to YouTube shortly after, maybe sometime this week, and that way anyone who wasn't able to attend tonight but wants to receive the same information will be able to view the slides and hear our Q&A. So the first item on the agenda is just kind of a brief overview of the program. We're going to talk about sort of why we're here, and then we're going to move into some of the tools that we have in our toolbox. After that, we're going to review a concept design. We'd love to get some input from you all about how that can better suit your needs. And then lastly, we're going to kind of talk about some of the next steps in the project, how it will proceed from tonight onward to hopefully, a traffic calmed street. But to go back to the beginning, what is traffic calming? The NSTC program, that's Neighborhood Street Traffic Calming, focuses on residential streets. This is one that generally prefers physical solutions that encourage lower speeds, and we do that over significant lengths, basically meaning that we don't try to do these projects like one block at a time, but usually like a whole street or a significant section of a street. One of the primary goals of the traffic calming program is speed reduction. We'll talk about why that's really important in a minute. Um, Before that, got to cover the three E's of traffic calming. Those are education, enforcement, and engineering. Engineering here is bold and underlined because that is the component that NDOT has the most control over, like the greatest ability to affect. And the idea here is that if we design a street to be safe without education or enforcement, we can generally expect more consistent outcomes indefinitely, rather than relying on simply telling people to drive safe or enforcing the laws if they don't. Those two are a little more limited in their ability to generate safe outcomes. The reason that speed is such an important target with these designs is because it's very closely tied to safety. So in Nashville, we're pursuing Vision Zero, which is the idea that nobody should have to die or be seriously injured on Nashville's public roadways. Um, and speed ties into that because the faster a car is going, should it hit a pedestrian or a cyclist, um, the smaller the chance they have at surviving. It's fairly intuitive, but we see relatively good rates of survival at 25 miles an hour. That's the speed limit on Mashburn Road. But then as the speeds of vehicles creep up, that likelihood of surviving starts to go way down, especially as you get up and above that 35-mile-an-hour range. It really does seriously affect a person's ability to make it out of that crash alive. So all that is to say, that's sort of why we're focused on speeding and reducing it on streets where people live and might be walking, because really we're here to generate a safety project. Um, this is a really popular program in Nashville, as you all might be aware. The map to the right is actually a screenshot of NDOT's live traffic calming tracker. So you'd be able to zoom in to Mashburn on this online and see kind of what phase your project is in. Um, but it shows every project in the city. So all of those dark blue lines are projects that have been completed. All of the magenta are ones who have applied. And then the other colors are some stage in between the beginning and end there. When Mashburn was selected, it was from a pool of over 575 streets. We were only able to select 25 of those. So Mashburn ranked in the top 25 streets of like most in need of traffic calming. We'll take a look why in just a second. But before we dig into how those streets are chosen and why Mashburn was, we want to make sure that everyone is aware of Hub Nashville. And the reason for that is this kind of project is relatively limited in the tools that we have to address speeding, but there's all kinds of things that NDOT does outside of traffic calming. And there's also all kinds of things that, Metro Nashville does outside of NDOT. So should we encounter anything tonight that, we'd like to notify Metro of, but can't quite be covered with a project like this, we want to make sure everyone is aware that this is a resource for anyone in the city to use. Okay, so moving on to the prioritization process that I mentioned earlier. So how do we choose which streets out of that really large group that's applied, get traffic calming? And we measure 5 different factors. So after a street has applied, we will measure the vehicle speeds, the volume. That's how many cars are driving on that road. And then vulnerable user injury and fatality. So that's looking at the crash history and seeing, have any pedestrians or cyclists been hit in the last 10 years? Non-driver accommodations means like, do you have sidewalks or not? So if you don't have sidewalks, we give you more points, recognizing that pedestrians and vehicles are sharing space and underscoring that it's very important for everyone to be driving and walking safely in that circumstance. And then trip destinations is, asking, are there schools, parks, sort of things nearby that might generate pedestrian trips more than, just residences. So we like to consider that as well. All of those things are combined into a score between 0 and 100 and kind of just listed in order from most points to least points. So Mashburn had, enough that they were in the top 25 streets back in August of 2024. Some of the specific data that we observed on Mashburn is that the 85th percent speed, that means that 15% of those measured were driving faster than this, and 85% were driving slower, was 35 miles an hour. So that, of course, is a relatively dangerous speed to be going on a residential road where people might be walking or crossing, things like that. And you also had a relatively high volume, over 1,800 vehicles per day. In a previous meeting for the street, we did hear some feedback that some cut-through traffic was suspected. So with this data, that sort of makes sense. We generally would agree with that suspicion. And Mashburn is relatively narrow as streets go. So I don't know if it was like super consistent, but generally it was around or slightly above 20 feet wide. When we talk about the tools we have at our disposal, that'll become a little more relevant because not all of them work on narrow roads like this one. But it is something that we consider and look at when we do our design. And lastly, this is a map of the project extents. So you see that Mashburn Road does continue a little bit past Thompson Lane to the south. The street that applied was just from Thompson Lane up to Glen Rose Avenue, kind of the piece that connects those two larger roads through this neighborhood. So that brings us to tools, but before we dive in and look at those, I want to just pause and see if anyone has questions on what we've covered so far. Like I said, we're going to move into the specific tools and design and next steps, but I do want to, make sure to pause a few times and see if folks have questions or input, really any of the above. All right. Well, sounds like we can move on. I do want to remind everyone that we have a chat function. So if you'd prefer to use that to ask questions, that's totally fine. I'll see it and can answer. So feel free to throw those in, as I'm speaking, if you'd like. But first things first, one of the most common tools that the traffic calming program in Nashville uses are speed cushions. These are modular vertical deflection devices that are bolted onto the road. And essentially what they form is kind of like an elongated speed bump that's 6 feet wide. So unlike a speed bump, it is designed for a target speed of around 20 to 25 miles an hour. So not like those really short, relatively high speed bumps you might see in like a parking lot. These are intended to be driven over at or around the speed limit. Um, they're narrow. They're that kind of 6 foot wide width is really deliberate, and it's such that large emergency vehicles such as fire trucks or ambulances have an easier time getting over them than smaller personal vehicles might. Um, and they come in a variety of lengths, so 7 foot, 10 and a half, 14 foot long. That kind of just depends on what target speed we're going for and the context of a roadway. Most of the time we land on that 10.5 foot length. Um, Happy to go into more details if necessary. Similar to speed cushions are speed tables. Really the only difference here is that these stretch all the way across the road, so they don't have that benefit of reduced impact to emergency vehicles. Um, but they're the same materials. You can probably tell they're made out of the same modules bolted to the road, just the same as speed cushions are. Um, and they too come in a variety of lengths and widths to kind of be tailored to a given street's conditions. Now, I mentioned that these are kind of the most common tools that we use in the traffic calming program, and that's because they've been shown to be a good return on our investment, essentially meaning they're an efficient way to get effective results from these projects. And that's demonstrated here by these two graphs reflecting the results of a limited study that was conducted in 2023. Um, Basically, what we saw is the average speed of those projects came down from 31 miles an hour to 22 afterwards. And the 85th percent speed, that metric I mentioned before, came down all the way from 37 miles an hour to 25, which was the speed limit of those projects. Um, so these results were generally consistent with the research that's been conducted all over the country and in Canada. But we wanted to know that that still applied in Nashville, and we're excited to find out that it generally does. Um, Now, speed cushions or tables or really any vertical measures are not always appropriate along the full length of streets, particularly streets that have relatively steep hills or sharp curves that might limit one's ability to see these coming. So when we encounter gaps like that, where maybe we can't have a consistently spaced speed cushion design, we sometimes use radar feedback signs and a couple other things to kind of supplement traffic calming design. Um, these don't physically affect the vehicles that are using the road. They also don't do any enforcement, so they're not like taking a picture or sending anyone tickets. They do educate a little bit by showing one their speed as they're approaching the sign and comparing it to the posted speed. So it does have an effect, on the folks that maybe didn't realize they were speeding and are reminded that they are. So they do see some reduction in speed, but not quite as much as those vertical measures that we talked about a second ago. On wider roads with excess pavement, sometimes all of that excess space can generate speeding. We're all a little more comfortable like driving quickly on a wide empty interstate than we would be like through an alley. So a way to kind of capitalize on that effect is by narrowing a wide road with striping that we see here to kind of make the road feel a little more claustrophobic, not as much like an airport runway. This has an added benefit of kind of helping delineate where a pedestrian might want to walk. If they were in a neighborhood without sidewalks, it can just sort of help you feel a little more comfortable that, if I'm over here and the cars are over here, we're not going to hopefully cross paths. All that being said, this approach does not physically affect the vehicles, so we're kind of relying on that psychological effect for the slowing. Similar to narrowing, but at intersections, we'll sometimes do things called bulb outs. This is also referred to as like curb extensions or turn hardening. They go by a number of names. But essentially what we're doing is taking an intersection that is larger than it needs to be, and because of that, can allow for vehicles to use it at greater speeds, and narrowing it from the outside in so that crossing distances are shorter and the turns are sharper, which forces vehicles to take them slowly and a little more deliberately. This helps pedestrians by allowing less time for them to be in the travel lanes while they're crossing, and provides more time for turning vehicles to see them if I'm crossing one way and someone is turning toward me. In neighborhoods that see really heavy parking on the street, these can also enforce the existing parking regulations that say you are not supposed to park within 30 feet of a crosswalk. The reason for this is we want to make sure that pedestrians crossing the street are as visible as possible from all approaches to the intersection, just making sure that that kind of crash is not likely to happen. Um, on wide roads, we can do chicanes. This is basically where you take a straight road, but then zigzag the center line along the length to kind of force maneuvering, turning as cars go down the street. Um, Mashburn, of course, is just wide enough for 2 lanes, so we're not able to do something like this here. Um, Generally, it's similar to narrowing. It does affect the amount of on-street parking, which is why we don't see them too often here in Nashville. And like I said, they're generally only available for streets that are pretty wide. And then lastly, we have traffic circles. These work similar to bulb outs, but rather than narrowing from the outside in, we narrow from the inside out. This creates an intersection that's pretty similar to a roundabout, but a little bit simpler. Um, but basically asking drivers, if they're going left, to start turning right and go all the way around that circle. Um, and these can help reduce like T-bone crashes, and if there are any areas where maybe stop signs are not quite as effective as we'd all like them to be. Um, these are a tool that can improve those intersections. I will say it does take a pretty large intersection for one of these to be installed and not impede, any emergency vehicle access. So we've done a few of these around Nashville, but they're not nearly as common as the other treatments that we've talked about. Okay, um, so all of that is the tools we've got. I've just switched the screen to the concept design for Mashburn. So while we're looking at this, I want to pause and just see, does anyone have questions about the tools, or are we ready for me to sort of explain what we're looking at here and sort of what we had in mind when we were designing this? All right, so I will go ahead and just kind of give a quick run through of what we're looking at. So from left, which is the southern end at Thompson Lane, to right, which is the northern end at Glenrose Avenue, we've got 4 sets of speed cushions kind of around the Live Oak Road route. These are in a series spaced about as evenly apart as we could get them. We'd shoot for between a spacing of 300 and 500 feet. That's generally shown to be kind of the optimal spacing where we don't leave enough space for drivers to get back up to dangerous speeds to make up for lost time. But we don't put them so close together that they're sort of losing their effect per cushion, you could say. Um, you'll notice we do have a relatively wide gap between the next cushion. That's on account of the hill that I believe is downhill from south to north. Um, and so what we've done there, because we couldn't do cushions, is placed a radar feedback sign facing the uphill direction. So anyone who is coming down the hill and maybe inadvertently picking up speed after they've gone over the cushions, they're still reminded that they're in a traffic calmed neighborhood. And if they're going faster than the speed limit, it'll flash to make that known to them. Uh, at the intersection of Ennis Road and Mashburn Road, we've proposed a set of bulb outs. That was an idea from one of the attendees of our last meeting. They asked that we consider it there, and we did take a look at that intersection, and the radii are pretty wide, so we thought it was a good candidate for a little bit of narrowing, especially because it's kind of at the end of that section where we weren't able to do as much vertical measures as we might have liked. And then following that up toward Glenrose Avenue, we were able to put in 2 more sets of speed cushions so that from either direction, you're encountering some vertical measure before you get into that middle section with the hill. So our hope is that by doing kind of all of these in tandem, we'll find that traffic is consistently reminded that this is a neighborhood where they should be driving slowly and not able to be reckless. Any questions about all of that? I know that kind of ran through a lot of information at once, so feel free to speak up, or if you don't have a question but just want to make sure that we've got something to keep in mind, we're happy to take feedback of any type.
Will the radar feedback sign be permanent, or like, I guess, just for like a couple years or something, or is that like a permanent installation?
It's a permanent installation, and NDOT does maintain them. There's a version of them that's more of like a trailer for kind of spot situations, but that is not this kind of design. We're proposing permanent modifications to Mashburn based on the behavior that we've seen.
Great. Okay, that makes sense.
I wanted to ask, does the traffic calming on Mashburn, in your experience, does that also have a calming effect on the surrounding streets that lead in? Like I live on Ennis that leads into Mashburn towards Thompson.
That's a good question. So we have not done a whole lot of studying on the effects of traffic calming on like other roads that are nearby. That is something that we're working on. So, if you want to stay tuned, we might be able to show some results sometime this year. But at the very least, I would think that going over vertical measures to access Ennis Road would help remind people that they're somewhere that people want to live and walk. Certainly we can't expect, well, we know that not everyone is going to be responsible everywhere, but the hope is that, as we do more of this, we'll see safer driving overall.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, well, we can definitely come back if any more questions surface, but I will continue with the presentation and we'll look at sort of the next steps for a project like this. So all traffic calming projects start with an application. So I believe it was the previous neighborhood association president applied for this one. It was prioritized and selected as we covered. And then tonight we're here at the neighborhood meeting where we've kind of reviewed the program, sort of the rough design that we're looking at. After tonight is the design phase. So what we still need to do in order to finalize these plans is go out and do a site visit and take measurements and make sure that we know exactly where we can and can't place cushions. We also need to coordinate around driveways and kind of all those little minutia that go into a design like this. Once that's done, we can either schedule a second neighborhood meeting to review those plans, if you'll have like questions that weren't able to be resolved tonight, or would like to kind of get more information about the program. What we can also do is post those plans online and just move into the ballot phase. If y'all would prefer for the project to kind of move a little bit quicker than the second meeting timeline, really either's fine. We're happy to do second meetings, but we found that some neighborhoods are a little more eager to just kind of push the project forward. So we opened up the option to sort of move directly to that ballot. Speaking of the ballot, that's the step after those two. And basically what we do is send out mailers similar to those that, invited y'all to this meeting and ask, you've seen these plans, would you like the project to proceed? Should 66% of those who vote pass, the project will move into construction. And that timeline right now, I believe, is around 8 to 10 months. That's certainly a little longer than we would like, but basically the construction crews are working through a pretty large backlog that's been generated over the last couple of years. So with all that in mind, does anyone have a preference on whether a second meeting is necessary or desired? Feel free to speak up or throw in the chat, really either one.
I would be okay with it going to the online ballot and not doing a second meeting.
Yeah, I agree with that. Given participation thus far, I think we can just move ahead.
Sure, that sounds good. Okay, well, with that in mind, we can talk more about the balloting specifics. So up here is roughly what the ballot postcard will look like. You'll notice there is a unique ID code down in the lower right-hand corner. That's just to make sure that each vote that we're getting is specific to a person, and we're not like having unintended duplicates or anything like that. The voting period is going to be open for around 6 weeks. We hope that's enough time for anyone to, like spread the word if they'd like to, or maybe if they were out of town and come back in town, check their mail, but not so long that we're like delaying these projects unnecessarily. You only get to choose yes or no, and then like I mentioned, if 2/3 of the respondents vote yes, that's like a successful ballot and the project moves forward. A little bit about the eligibility for this voting, because I know that not everyone on this call like specifically lives on Mashburn. The policy of the program is that residential properties, churches, and schools whose properties abut the affected right-of-way is the group that is voting. Vacant properties, so like ones without buildings on them, are ineligible, and then like operating businesses. So if you were like a mechanic or a sandwich shop or something, that's ineligible as well. But short of that, essentially every one of these properties that is highlighted here, the owner of that is going to be sent a mailer to the address that is in the public record. So I say that because it's not always that specific house. It's like wherever that owner receives mail as they've listed it with the Register of Deeds. Any questions about that? I realize it's a little bit complex, but happy to go back to any of those points. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end. Happy to answer any other questions that y'all have. Additionally, my email is up here on the screen, as is the kind of NDOT traffic calming general email account. I will ask if you reach out to me to also copy that traffic calming account so that the NDOT staff can stay in the loop as needed. But I'll be around to, if anyone needs information or anything like that. And lastly, thank you everyone for joining tonight. We've got NDOT's traffic calming website URL up here on the screen, as well as some social media accounts that NDOT runs to keep everyone informed on the various goings on transportation around the city. Do we have any final thoughts before we close out?
Just one from me, if you don't mind, or if you want my help in like continuing to post this on the socials, on WNA social media and newsletter and stuff, just keep me updated on like when things are going out or if a due date's approaching, and I can help try and promote it or keep people aware. We're gonna have our next social event in a couple of weeks in May, so we can bring it up there as well. But who knows how many people will attend various things and even pay attention on social media. So
Yeah, well, that's really helpful. I appreciate that. Do you mind telling me what day in May the event is?
we haven't officially booked it. I'm waiting to hear back from my co-president, but it's going to be either the 10th or the 18th.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll go ahead and try to get those plans done and posted. I think it'd be great if we could like have those ballots going out around that time, just so that we can like give one to you all, and the message can basically be like, hey, look for this in your mailbox. Here's what it's about. But yeah, we'd really appreciate your help spreading the word, because we definitely want to make sure that anyone who would like to have input here, has the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Awesome. Well, anything else before we wrap up? All right. Well, once again, thank you all so much for your time tonight. We look forward to finishing up this project and sending it to the ballot.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you,
Of course.
Pilar
Thank
and
you.
Margaret, for joining.